Hey there, sleepy traveler. You've wandered into a quiet corner of history tonight, far from the glimmer of crowns and sparkling jewels you might imagine. Royalty, well, it wasn't always a sparkling parade of silk and gold, as the picture books would have you believe. In fact, sometimes it was more like a slow, weary game of genetic roulette, with all the glamour swapped for shadows, whispers, and a fair share of unexpected ailments. So you settle in a little closer, maybe pulling a soft blanket up to your chin, as we travel back to a time when the throne was less a throne and more a peculiar, sometimes uncomfortable seat, carved from the tangled branches of family trees that twisted back into themselves. Picture ancient stone castles heavy with the scent of damp stone and flickering candles, their walls lined with velvet tapestries, muffling the footsteps of courtiers who carried far more than ambition in their veins. You might think that being born a prince or princess meant a golden life, but actually, the story is filled with quiet struggles, silent battles fought not on distant fields but deep inside their own bodies. Royal families often married within their own bloodlines, a practice that seemed wise for keeping power close, but was, in truth, a slow, genetic shuffle that sometimes dealt the unluckiest cards to those born into the crown. Imagine a quiet chamber bathed in the soft flicker of candlelight, where a royal physician leans over a fragile infant swaddled in fine linens, eyes filled with worry rather than wonder. Across the dim room, an aged queen watches silently, her fingers tracing the folds of a velvet gown, thinking not of parties or processions, but of the unseen burdens carried silently by her bloodline. So tonight, as you lie back and let your mind drift, consider this. The splendor of royalty was often a delicate veil stretched thin over a much more complicated story, one of inherited quirks, fragile health, and sometimes the quiet tragedy of a crown worn not as a symbol of power, but as a heavy weight upon a body and soul. It's a tale wrapped in velvet shadows and whispered secrets, perfect for a slow, calm journey into the oddly human side of history. You step softly through a long, dimly lit corridor, the cold stone walls rising high on either side like ancient sentinels. The air is thick but still, carrying a faint scent of beeswax mingled with a hint of fading jasmine, the remnants of a once lavish bouquet resting forgotten in an iron sconce. Shadows stretch and sway as the flickering flames of candles dance gently along the carved wooden paneling, their golden light casting uneven pools of warmth upon tapestries heavy with dust and stories long whispered. The palace feels vast and endless, a labyrinth of quiet secrets and muted footsteps, as if the very stones are breathing in soft, slow rhythms, encouraging your eyelids to grow heavy with each measured breath. You imagine. It is here, in these dim and layered shadows, that a curious idea was born and nurtured over centuries. An idea so carefully tended that it grew into something both delicate and dangerous. The notion of dynastic purity. At first, it was like a faint fragrance, barely noticeable among the richer sense of power and alliance. But over time, it became the defining essence of a realm and its rulers. Dynastic purity was a slender thread woven into the fabric of royal identity, a whisper that the blood coursing through the veins of kings and queens was unlike any other, a sacred stream to be preserved and protected. This was not just about family ties. It was about a lineage believed to be blessed, chosen, even divine. The notion wove its way into the very marrow of the monarchy, gently at first, like the soft rustle of silk against stone. This concept was especially cherished in the palaces of Spain, where generations of monarchs walked beneath vaulted ceilings embroidered with delicate frescoes. They believed that the strength of their reign depended on the purity of their bloodline, an idea that began as an elegant assurance, a promise that the throne would not slip from their grasp. But as centuries passed, this whisper of purity grew heavier, like the thick velvet curtains drawn tight in the palace chambers, pressed down by the weight of expectation. You can almost feel the coolness of the polished marble floors underfoot, the faint echo of endless footsteps in the vast emptiness. The patience of history stretches before you as if slow-moving candlelight itself were a companion, urging you to lean into this quiet story, as if you were reclining on a soft velvet chaise, the gentle flicker of flame lulling your thoughts into a calm, wandering place. But this idea of purity, tender as it began, gradually became more rigid, and then quietly toxic. As the royal houses sought to protect their precious blood, they wove tighter and tighter circles, marrying cousins, second cousins, even more distant relations. The web of family bonds grew so tangled that it was no longer just about ancestry. It became a kind of trap, delicate but unyielding, like porcelain threaded with cracks beneath the surface. The halls of the palace, once filled with fragrant orange blossoms and the murmurs of courtly love, gradually echoed with something else. The silent weight of unspoken worries, the cautious glances cast across dinner tables set with fine porcelain and glistening silverware. The obsession with keeping bloodlines pure became a shadow, a slow-moving specter that crept into the chambers of the mind. The candles flicker again, their light trembling gently against the cold stone. You breathe in the subtle aroma of melting wax mingled with the faint musk of ancient wood. An olfactory. Within these walls, dynastic purity was no longer a grace but a chain. The narrowness of choice, the endless repetitions of family trees looping inward like a spiral stair, began to twist and bind. It's a slow story, not one of sudden tragedies, but of a gradual turning inward, of a pressure mounting imperceptibly like the slow drip of candle wax pooling beneath the wick. You can almost sense the tired eyes behind painted portraits watching from their gilded frames. Faces, lined with the quiet resignation of generations, who bore the heavy mantle of expectation. They carry the stories of alliances forged and broken, of whispered fears and hopes pressed beneath heavy velvet curtains. And beneath it all, the idea that purity was power slowly became a shadow that darkened the noble lineage, quietly shaping destinies in ways no one could fully foresee. You feel the stillness settle around you now, the palace holding its breath as if waiting for the next quiet turn in its long, slow tale. So you lie back, letting the soft warmth of the candlelight cradle your thoughts, and the gentle coolness of the stone remind you of the fragile beauty in these ancient, complicated stories. Stories where light and shadow dance together in a timeless embrace, just like the flickering flames that illuminate this Spanish palace tonight. You find yourself standing quietly in the dim, shadowed corner of a grand, cavernous hall. The air hangs heavy with the scent of beeswax candles melting slowly in their brass holders, their warm, flickering flames casting gentle, dancing shadows that stretch and shrink upon the ancient stone walls. A faint hint of lavender and old wood lingers, weaving in and out of the richer aromas of roasting meats and sweet pastilles burning softly from nearby incense burners. You are quite simply a servant here, a silent, almost invisible observer to a story that has unfolded across generations, like the slow turning of a vast, intricate tapestry. You can feel the solid weight of the polished oak floor beneath your worn leather shoes, the uneven stone beneath the thick rugs that cover it in patches, muffling your footsteps as your breath settles into a slow rhythm. Around you, the murmurs of noble voices drift softly, low and steady, as family after family gathers to celebrate unions that have repeated a curious pattern through many decades. Your eyes, accustomed now to the muted candlelight, watch as cousins meet and marry, their faces shifting only slightly with the passage of time. The same sorts of smiles, the same measured glances, the same delicate handclasps. The first time you noticed it, it was subtle. A gentle unease, like the faint chill of a draft slipping through a cracked window, barely perceptible, but there. You remember standing there. The warmth of the room contrasted with the strange, cold knot settling in your stomach, a quiet whisper of something unsettled. As the years passed, the pattern became more pronounced. Cousins marrying cousins, again and again, like threads woven tightly within the same fabric. At first, these weddings were occasions full of glittering joy, silver goblets clinking, rich tapestries fluttering gently in the breeze that found its way inside through heavy velvet curtains, the soft rustle of silk gowns brushing ancient stone floors. You could see the flicker of candlelight illuminating pearly teeth in polite laughter, the delicate scent of gardenias worn in coiffed hair, blending with the faintly musty smell of old books lining grand shelves in the adjoining library. But beneath this elegant surface, you noticed something that made the flickering shadows seem longer, more insistent. The smiles, while beautiful and practiced, sometimes didn't quite reach the eyes. The children born from these unions often bore not only the family name but also subtle marks, a hesitancy in their speech, a frailty in their limbs, a quietness that set them apart. You watch them grow, like fragile saplings in a dense forest where the sun barely reached, their laughter softer, their steps slower. The air around these gatherings, once fragrant with the heady scent of blooming roses in the spring gardens, grew heavier, tinged with an unspoken tension, like the faint metallic scent before a storm. You remember the way the servants spoke in hushed tones when the noble families were elsewhere, voices dipping low like the crackle of firelight, eyes darting nervously as they shared their quiet observations and whispered fears. There was talk of the family's insistence on preserving bloodlines, of ancient beliefs wrapped in dusty tomes and nearly forgotten prayers. You listened without replying, your heart heavy with the weight of generations stacking uneasily upon one another like stones in an ancient cairn. Sometimes, when the great hall emptied and the last candle guttered low, you would stay behind, your fingers tracing the cool, rough edges of the stone walls, the surface worn smooth by centuries of hands. The silence in these moments was a soft blanket, yet beneath it, your mind would wander back to the faces you had seen again and again, faces that changed almost imperceptibly but inexorably, like ripples spreading across still water. You felt the quiet accumulation of stories echoing through the corridors, and the endless generations repeating the same ritual dance of closeness, of marriage within the family, as if trying to hold together something fragile that threatened to unravel. In these quiet reflections, the flickering candlelight seems to whisper secrets too old to speak aloud, tales of love, duty, and a haunting, stubborn attachment to bloodlines that bind and constrict in equal measure. The weight of this history settles around you like a velvet cloak, heavy but familiar, and you can't help but wonder what it might mean for those who walk these halls now, and those yet to come. So here you are, the silent witness to a centuries-old story, watching generations of cousins marry beneath the same dim glow, feeling the gentle but persistent unease that stirs like a slow wind through the branches of an ancient tree. And as you breathe in the mingling scents of wax and wood smoke and old paper, you lie in wait for the next chapter to unfold. The next quiet wedding ceremony, inked into the living parchment of this family's peculiar history. As you settle deeper into the soft embrace of your blankets, your eyes heavy with the gentle tug of sleep, you allow your thoughts to drift slowly through the corridors of time, guided by the flickering, amber glow of countless candle flames. Shadows dance upon ancient stone walls, whispering secrets carried through bloodlines as old as kingdoms themselves. And yet, behind the shimmering veneer of crowns and scepters, the tales you're about to wander into are not always those of triumph or glory. There are darker chambers ahead, rooms filled with quiet sorrow, with the haunting presence of madness, deformity, and loneliness. Imagine, if you will, the delicate crown resting heavy on a brow not only burdened with power, but also shadowed by unseen afflictions. Royal blood, you might think, is a blessing, a thread of privilege that weaves power, prestige, and eternal remembrance. But as you let your fingers trace the edges of an ancient parchment, you begin to sense the other side of that weave, the tangled strands that bear no light at all. In those quiet, candlelit rooms where history's great figures once stood, some were haunted by minds that refused the gentle lull of reason. Madness, as much a guest in royal courts as the courtiers themselves, crept in unnoticed at times, or thundered loud enough to echo through marble halls. It was a madness that could twist perception, shatter relationships, and shroud the throne in shadows. You almost imagine the scent of aged parchment mingling with the subtle, unsettling musk of incense burning low, as you listen to whispers of kings and queens burdened by thoughts no one else could bear. The deformities whispered about in hushed tones, subtle, strange, or grotesque, were as much a part of this story as the royal jewels themselves. Some born with limbs that bent oddly, others with faces marked by disease or sorrow. These physical reminders were not just personal tragedies, but living symbols of the heavy costs secreted deep within the vaults of power. You might feel the rough texture of stone walls under your fingertips, cold and unyielding, as you imagine the way these royals navigated a world that prized perfection and strength, while harboring such visible. You hear the faint creak of a heavy wooden door, closing slowly behind a monarch who must face their own fears alone. The vast chambers that housed them, ornate, echoing, but empty of true companionship, become almost palpable in your mind's ear. It's a quiet warning. Royal blood was not always the gleaming blessing it seemed. Sometimes it was a slow, whispering curse, a chain linking mind, body, and soul to a destiny marked by suffering rather than splendor. And as you lie here tonight, your breath slowing, your heartbeat steady and soft, you prepare yourself to follow these stories into their quiet, somber depths. Because in the stillness where history's brightest crowns once shimmered, you will find shadows that speak of human fragility, of secrets better left unspoken, and of the loneliness that even the greatest power cannot soothe. So as your eyelids grow heavier still, and the night wraps around you like a gentle shroud, remember this gentle caution. The tales ahead are not merely of kings and queens in their glory, but of their humanity laid bare, broken, beautiful, and quietly haunting. And with that thought resting softly in your mind, you let yourself drift, ready to step into those shadowed corridors when the time is right. You find yourself drifting gently into the calm, golden haze of 16th century Spain, a time when the air itself seems thick with incense and the soft crackle of candle flame. Imagine the flickering shadows dancing against the ancient stones of a grand palace, where tapestries embroidered with shimmering threads whisper stories of distant lands and forgotten conquests. The scent of aged parchment mingles with a faint trace of orange blossoms from a courtyard garden, a quiet, lingering fragrance that seems to hold the secrets of an empire sprawling far beyond the horizon. In this serene but potent moment, you step closer to the epicenter of power, the figure of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain. Picture him seated in a vast, dimly lit chamber, the walls lined with oak panels carved with heraldry and myth. His piercing gaze, calm but commanding, surveys a world both vast and tangled. He is a man whose very blood seems to weave together the fates of Europe, the Americas, and beyond. An empire so immense that it once was said, "The sun never sets upon it." Charles is a paradox of presence and quiet weight. His robes, heavy and richly embroidered in gold and crimson, brush softly against the stone floor as he moves. The clink of a jeweled ring on his finger is muffled by the thick velvet sleeves. Beyond the windows, the bustling streets of Toledo hum faintly, but here, in this chamber, time flows slower, thick and deliberate, like the slow pour of wine from a crystal decanter. This emperor's power is not only political or military. It is, in many ways, a legacy written deep into the fabric of his very being, inscribed in the intricate patterns of his lineage. You might imagine his family tree as a sprawling tapestry, threads crossing over and twisting back, knots formed by marriages between cousins and distant relatives, each union a strand binding houses and kingdoms together. A dynasty built not just on conquest and treaties, but on bloodlines that loop in on themselves. Already in his time, the subtle signs of this genetic entanglement begin to show. A delicate, almost imperceptible frailty in his features, the faint shadow of ailments passed down through intertwined family lines. The strains of such close kinship, what we now understand as the echoes of inherited traits, softly ripple beneath his composed exterior. It's as if the very essence of his rule, held in the balance of power and lineage, carries an unseen weight. You might imagine the gentle rustle of a letter being unfolded on a nearby desk, the fragile parchment curling slightly at the edges. In the careful script lies correspondence that speaks of alliances, of heirs and marriages arranged with the precision of a chess master's moves. Each match intended to cement power, yet each one also a thread drawing tighter the weave of kinship. Outside, the warm Spanish sun casts long, dappled shadows through the latticework, and the scent of earth and citrus drifts in, grounding this scene in the tangible world. It's a world where grand ambitions and quiet biological realities intertwine, where an emperor's strength is balanced delicately upon the interlace of family ties as much as on armies and territories. So here you are, at this early moment, suspended in the hush before the unfolding of a story that is as much about the strange, whispered realities of lineage as it is about crowns and kingdoms. The calm breath before the slow turning of history's pages. You lie back gently, letting the warm, fragrant air settle around you, ready to drift deeper into the tale of Charles V and the quiet complexities of his powerful, entangled empire. You settle more comfortably into your pillow, the soft rustle of linen mixing with the faint scent of aged parchment and flickering candlelight. Imagine, if you will, a grand hall somewhere in medieval Europe, or perhaps in the sun-warmed courts of the Ottoman Empire, or the richly woven tapestries of ancient Egypt, where the faint murmur of whispered conversations blends with the crackle of the hearth's fire. In these spaces, power is not only wielded by sword or decree, but delicately woven through family ties, contracts inked with the blood and trust of kinship. In this world, political power is a fragile and precious thing, held by few, sought by many, and carefully guarded like a rare jewel. It's not enough to be born into the right family. One must also ensure that the family's strength remains intact, and that means keeping wealth, land, and influence concentrated and secure. One ancient and surprisingly common practice emerges here, a quiet strategy, marrying your cousin. Yes, your first cousin. Now you might wrinkle your brow softly in the dim light, wondering about this closeness, marrying someone so near, with whom you share a grandparent or two. But in these quiet chambers, where the scent of incense mingles with the cold stone walls, such cousin marriages were not seen as odd or taboo. Instead, they were the careful stitches that mended the delicate fabric of political alliances, ensuring that power did not slip away like sand through restless fingers. Imagine a sprawling estate, dotted with towers and shadowed cloisters, where the eldest son is expected to carry the family name and responsibility. If he were to marry far away, into a different house, a foreign land, the wealth his family holds could fragment, divided among strangers. But by choosing a bride who is also kin, a first cousin, the family effectively doubles down on their strength, keeping their lands, their titles, and their secrets tightly knit together. This strategy was so widespread that in many noble and royal families, first cousin marriages became standard practice, almost an unspoken rule. It wasn't just about love or companionship. It was about survival, about making sure the bloodline, the status, and the legacy would glide smoothly from one generation to the next, unmarred by outsiders' claims. You can almost hear the quiet council of advisors in dimly lit chambers, their voices low and steady, weaving arguments like threads in a tapestry. This marriage will keep our lands united, they might say, and bind our allies closer than ever. The bride and groom, cousins both, exchange vows under the watchful eyes of ancestors' portraits, their union a bond of duty, strategy, and family pride. In Egypt, pharaohs sometimes married their siblings or cousins, a practice wrapped in divine symbolism, meant to mirror the gods' own unions and to maintain the royal blood's sanctity. In medieval Europe, cousin marriages were less about divine right and more about political calculus, but the quiet necessity was the same. Power must be consolidated, not diluted. These unions helped prevent the fragmentation of estates, a serious risk when daughters married strangers, potentially giving away a portion of the family's wealth as dowry or inheritance. Marrying within the family meant that land and titles stayed bonded, castles remained under familiar banners, and alliances were strengthened rather than weakened by external ties. The practice also served as a subtle form of diplomacy, an internal pact rather than an external treaty. When two cousins married, the families were not just linked by paper or promise, but by blood, forging bonds that could not be broken without tearing through shared ancestry and mutual interest. You can almost feel the soft rustle of velvet gowns and the steady weight of gold rings exchanged, each a symbol not just of affection, but of calculated preservation. Perhaps the bride's fingers tremble just a little as she touches the cool metal, knowing that she is part of a centuries-old tradition, a tradition that whispers through the stones beneath her feet and the shadows cast by flickering torches. Outside the grand halls, the common folk might never fully understand why nobles and royals marry their own cousins, but within these aristocratic circles, it is simply the way of the world. The closeness of kin is a fortress against rivals, a hedge against betrayal, and a quiet assurance that their power endures generation after generation. As you listen to the soft echoes of this ancient practice, you might find a strange comfort in its steady logic, a gentle reminder that even in the most complex webs of ambition, there is a kind of slow, patient pragmatism. The world turns quietly, and families bind themselves tightly, choosing unity over unfamiliarity and strategy over chance. So, as you lie back and close your eyes, imagine the whispered vows beneath candlelight, the cool stone beneath velvet slippers, and the slow, steady pulse of family blood, weaving its way through centuries, holding power together, one cousin marriage at a time. You step quietly through the great stone archway of the palace, the heavy scent of burning pinewood incense lingering like a soft veil in the chilly air. The walls around you are cold to the touch, carved from pale granite that drinks in the faint flicker of candlelight, casting long, stoic shadows that seem to hold their breath. This is the court of Philip II, a place where whispers weigh more than shouts, and every gesture is as measured as the slow drip of wax melting down a candle's side. As you move deeper into the hall, the hush enfolds you like a thick cloak. No laughter breaks the silence, only the faint scraping of fine fabric and the careful footfalls of courtiers moving with calculated grace. Here, every moment is threaded with a deliberate restraint, a quiet discipline that pervades the marble floors and the heavy tapestries depicting battles and pious queens. It's a world carved from order and precision, where emotions are kept folded neatly beneath the layers of stiff collars and heavy robes. You notice how the air is uncomfortably cool, not because of the stone walls alone, but because the court is kept distant from warmth, in both body and spirit. The conversations are low and clipped, laden with deference and formality. There is little room for the casual or carefree. Even the most trivial exchanges are conducted with an almost ritualistic solemnity. In this austere atmosphere, even time seems to move more slowly, as if the very pulse of the court is synchronized to the slow, unyielding beat of duty and control. Every face here is a mask, carefully crafted and maintained. Courtiers keep their eyes steady, never wandering too freely, lest they reveal a flicker of impatience or dissent. You can almost sense the weight pressing on their shoulders, the invisible chains of expectation and vigilance. Here, a careless word could unravel alliances, and a too bold glance might be the whisper that leads to downfall. Marriage in this world is not a dance of romance, but a carefully choreographed transaction, often arranged long before the first blush of affection ever blooms. From the moment a child is born into noble blood, their future is spun out like an unbreakable thread, woven tightly into the fabric of political strategy. You can almost hear the soft murmurs of scheming behind closed doors, the subtle exchange of delicate parchment treaties that bind families like gears in a vast, unyielding machine. These unions are contracts sealed not with kisses or shared dreams, but with cold promises of loyalty and alliance. The bride and groom, often mere children when these pacts are made, grow up shadowed by the knowledge that their lives and loves are not entirely their own. You can imagine the quiet, almost imperceptible sighs they must stifle, the personal desires folded away like folded linens, and stored in dark cupboards behind stone walls. In the cold, controlled environment of Philip's court, human warmth is a rare gift, dispensed sparingly and often with suspicion. Even feasts, which you might imagine as bursting with laughter and clinking glasses, are muted affairs. The long tables stretch under glittering chandeliers, their candlelight casting a pale glow, but the atmosphere is subdued. Servants move quietly between guests, attending to every need with careful precision, while the conversations circle around protocol and allegiance rather than gossip or jest. You can almost taste the dryness of the air, mingled with the faint tang of burning tallow and the subtle hint of incense meant to mask less pleasant odors. The heavy drapes block the sun's warmth, keeping the interiors dim and contemplative. In this place, it seems, life is lived beneath a shroud, where even spontaneous joy is tempered by the knowledge of ever-watchful eyes. At night, the palace hush deepens and the courtiers retreat to their chambers, which are themselves modest in warmth and decoration, reflecting the king's desire for order over luxury. You can imagine the quiet solitude behind those heavy doors, the rustle of fine linens, the soft glow of a single candle flickering against the rough stone walls. Sleep must come with a mind crowded by duty and strategy, the day's rituals replaying like a slow, steady chant in the dark. In this world, control is not merely a practice but a creed, and Philip II is both its master and its prisoner. His court moves like a solemn, unbroken chain, each link interlocking perfectly with the next, leaving little room for cracks or rebellion. You can almost feel the weight of generations pressing down here, the lives lived in careful submission to a vision of power that brooks no disobedience. As you step back toward the cold stone exit, the muffled sounds of the court fade into the stillness of the night. The air feels heavier now, pressed with the quiet inevitability of a world bound by rules older than the stones themselves. And as you slip out into the cool darkness beneath a sky freckled with distant stars, you carry with you the slow, measured rhythm of a court where every breath is an act of control, and every life is caught in the slow, unyielding tide of duty. You lie back gently on the soft cushions of your chamber, the faint scent of beeswax and lavender curling up from the half-burned candle by your bedside. The flickering flame casts slender shadows on the cold stone walls, their slow dance almost hypnotic. Outside, the evening hush settles over the palace grounds, muffling footsteps and murmurs, leaving only the occasional hoot of an owl to punctuate the stillness. It is in this quiet, in these lingering hours between waking and sleep, that the earliest whispers begin to stir, like distant echoes reverberating down a deep well. Imagine yourself stepping lightly along the dimly lit corridors of the royal court, the worn tapestries brushing softly against your fingertips as you pass. The air carries a faint trace of incense, sandalwood and myrrh, that mingles with the earthy scent of ancient stone. Somewhere nearby, a faint rustling, the hushed shuffle of slippers on cold marble, and the barely audible murmur of voices, too low to catch, but charged somehow with a restless tension. In these early days, the symptoms are barely noticeable, almost like a secret language whispered between the walls. They manifest subtly, like a creeping fog that blurs the edges of a familiar landscape. There are moments when the queen's gaze seems distant, her eyes clouded with an unspoken sorrow. She moves with a quiet hesitation, a slight tremor in her hands as she lifts her goblet, as if the weight of the jewel-encrusted cup grows heavier with each passing day. The court physicians speak in private meetings, their faces drawn and voices low, weighed down by a concern they cannot quite name aloud. They note strange patterns in her sleep, restless nights punctuated by unseen terrors, shadows that dance just beyond the candlelight. In the morning, her complexion appears pale and waxen, as though the life itself is being slowly drained from her cheeks by an unseen hand. Beyond the mind, there is a more tangible, bodily mystery unfolding. The Queen's chambers are filled with the scent of herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for memory, and the faint bitterness of wormwood. She takes these remedies dutifully, her fingers tracing the delicate parchment of ancient recipes in a steady, almost mechanical rhythm. Yet beneath the rituals, an ache lingers, a quiet despair growing from the knowledge that the heirs she so desperately seeks remain elusive. The subtle infertility weighs heavily, not just on her, but on the court's fragile balance. The absence of a child becomes a silent fissure, a crack in the foundation of royal hope. Courtiers exchange glances behind fans, their smiles tight, their whispers weaving through the galleries like a slow, dark current. Perhaps the gods have turned away, they speculate in hushed tones, or some shadow has fallen upon her womb. As you move through these spaces, the polished floors, the echoing antechambers, you can almost feel the pressure mounting. The Queen's footsteps falter sometimes, the graceful poise replaced by an almost imperceptible weariness. Her laughter, once a clear, ringing bell that brightened the throne room, now falls more often into quiet silence, or a forced smile that does not quite reach her eyes. The mental shadows deepen, though they remain carefully concealed beneath layers of velvet and silk. There are moments when she seems to drift, lost in a distant realm where the vibrant colors of court life dull to muted grays. Courtiers notice her sudden pauses mid-conversation, as though her thoughts have slipped away, leaving her adrift for brief, unsettling intervals. Her scribe records letters penned in a delicate, trembling hand, the ink sometimes blotting where tears have fallen unnoticed. Behind ornate screens and heavy velvet curtains, the gossip begins, as inevitable and slow as the turning of ancient parchment. Whispers weave through the courtyards, threading their way into the very fabric of palace life. Some say the Queen is touched by melancholy, a fragile shadow that no herb or prayer can lift. Others venture more guarded speculations, talk of madness creeping like a silent poison, of curses whispered by disgruntled rivals, or the cruel weight of loneliness wrapped tight around her like a shroud. Yet the Queen herself remains an enigma, caught between the world she must command and the fragile inner landscape slowly shifting beneath her woven gowns. You can almost hear the faint rustle of silk as she moves through her private chambers, the soft sigh of breath escaping in moments of solitude, the quiet struggle beneath the veneer of royal composure. In this delicate unfolding, the court becomes a stage not only for power and politics, but for the fragile, imperfect human story softening at its edges. The early symptoms, subtle, almost invisible, begin to shape a narrative whispered in shadowed halls, a story of quiet unraveling beneath the flickering candlelight and the watchful gaze of stone lions guarding the palace gates. As you lie back now, the candle flickers low, and the night deepens. Remember that even the most gilded lives hold their secret shadows, their silent battles waged far from the eyes of the world. And it is in this gentle darkness, wrapped in the hush of ancient stone and the scent of fading lavender, that the earliest traces of a hidden struggle first take root and begin their slow, inexorable rise. You find yourself slowly drifting into the shadowed chambers of early 17th century Spain, where candlelight flickers softly against the thick walls of the royal alcazar. The air is heavy with the faint scent of burning beeswax mingled with the must of old tapestries, and somewhere in the distance, the low murmur of courtiers whispers like a secret lullaby. Here in this hushed realm, you meet Philip III, King of Spain, a figure as gentle and pale as the moonlight resting upon his delicate hands. He sits upon a throne carved from dark wood, but the throne does not seem to command him. Instead, he seems to be drifting, a quiet breath caught in the vast machinery of empire. His gaze is soft, almost vacant, a clouded crystal through which the world filters with a gentle dullness. There's a curious serenity about him, but it is the serenity of a man quietly swept along by currents beyond his steering. You feel the stillness of his presence, a fragile calm that barely masks a deeper inertia. Philip's face, pale and somewhat rounded, carries traces of gentle kindness but little spark of sharpness or ambition. It is easy to imagine him as a man who would much rather be lost in a garden of orange blossoms, or tracing the delicate veins of leaves than wrestling with the intricacies of statecraft. His voice, when he speaks, is soft and measured, like a whispered lullaby shared between close friends in the dead of night. But behind that voice, you perceive the subtle echoes of those who speak more loudly around him. You notice the shadows of those advisors who surround him, like dark tendrils of smoke curling in the half-light. They are the ones who truly chart the course of the Spanish Empire in this era. These are the men who shape decisions cloaked in velvet persuasion, who craft policies behind heavy oak doors, and who carry the weight of the crown's ambitions. Philip listens, or appears to, but the rhythm of his own thoughts seems muffled, as if softened by a thick woolen blanket drawn tight against the chill of responsibility. If you lean closer, you might catch the faint sigh of a mind subdued, dulled not by neglect but the slow erosion of something deeper. This is not merely the burden of kingship. It is the quiet consequence of a lineage folded inward upon itself, like a rosebud trapped beneath layers of its own petals. Spain's royal family, across generations, had woven a tapestry of marriages tightly knit within their own bloodline, a practice intended to preserve the purity of their Habsburg heritage, but one that carried an unseen cost. In this dim room, the air almost seems to thicken with the weight of inherited fragility. You can almost feel the subtle blurring of vitality, a kind of soft fog settling over the king's faculties, like a field of wildflowers dulled by an unrelenting, pale mist. His jaw is set gently, his features bear a faint, yet unmistakable unevenness, a gentle testament to centuries of inbreeding. This is a slow erosion, not cataclysmic but persistent, like the quiet drip of water wearing down stone over centuries. The story of Philip III's reign is not one of grand proclamations or thunderous wars, but rather a slow, melancholic dance in which the king is more participant than leader. His advisors, particularly the Duke of Lerma, move like shadowy conductors, guiding the orchestra of Spain's policies, while Philip himself remains a silent instrument, played but not playing. It is as if the king's crown is not so much worn as it is held, a delicate porcelain cup in the hands of others, fragile enough to be broken if gripped too tightly. In the quiet moments, when the court is still and the candles gutter low, you might imagine Philip standing by a window, gazing out at the vast Spanish territories that stretch like a patchwork quilt across continents. His thoughts, however, seem distant, perhaps wandering somewhere soft and unfettered, far from the burdensome weight of empire and expectation. The very nature of his rule becomes a kind of whispered lullaby for a restless kingdom, soothing in its steadiness yet drifting, inevitably, toward decline. You sense that his gentleness is less a failing than a symptom of a broader fragility, a profound tiredness woven into the very bloodline he inherited. His inbred lineage left him with a mind that struggled to seize the reins of power firmly, a mind that often deferred to the sharper voices that filled the court's chambers. And so, the empire that once blazed with fiery ambition found itself steered by unseen hands, while its monarch moved quietly, like a shadow passing through a long, dim corridor. There is an odd kind of peace in this subdued royal presence, a reminder that history is not only shaped by fiery heroes and thunderous battles, but also shaped, just as profoundly, by those who drift quietly through the corridors of power, soft voices beneath the roar, gentle hands beneath the weight of a heavy crown. You lie back in your chair, letting the image of Philip III dissolve slowly like smoke, a faint, gentle presence beneath the vast tapestry of history, quietly guiding you into a calm and restful night. You find yourself in a quiet, dimly lit chamber deep within the French palace of the early 14th century. The air feels heavy, scented faintly with the sharp tang of melting beeswax candles, and the subtle whisper of lavender incense drifting from a nearby burner. The stone walls are cool to the touch, their uneven surfaces catching the flickering candlelight in soft shadows that dance and tremble, as though the past itself is breathing gently in the room. Here you turn your attention to a king named Philip IV, often called Philip the Fair, though the reality beneath that smooth epithet is far more tangled and tender. You imagine him now, a man whose life was a careful balance between the demands of power and the crushing weight of personal loss. His face, if you peer through time's mist, might show the strain of a man who carries a kingdom on his shoulders, and a fragile hope in his heart that seemed to slip through his fingers again and again. Philip was, by all accounts, a man deeply entangled in the complexities of desire and duty. His court was known to be a whirlpool of whispered alliances and the soft rustle of silk as mistresses drifted through the corridors like shadows at twilight. You can almost hear the hushed conversations, half-spoken promises wrapped in the scent of jasmine and hidden behind the clinking of silverware during lavish feasts. These women were more than mere distractions. They were a bittersweet balm for a restless soul, aching in places that crown and country could not reach. Yet beneath this indulgence lay a singular, unyielding obsession, the legacy of his bloodline, the hope for heirs who would carry his name and crown into some distant future. It's almost as if every stolen moment with a mistress was a secret thread in a tapestry he was desperately trying to weave, a tapestry that might outlast the shadow of death that seemed to hover so persistently over his family. You can almost feel the pulse of his anxiety in the heavy silence when the children came. Philip and his beloved queen, Joan of Navarre, were blessed with several offspring, yet life in the 14th century was unforgiving. The tender promise of each new child was often snatched away by illness, like fragile blossoms nipped by an early frost. The king's heart must have felt like a cavern echoing with loss, where hope and grief intertwined in a constant, slow dance. You imagine a cold winter's night, the palace rooms hushed and cloaked in darkness except for the candle flickering beside a cradle, where a child lies pale and still. The king's hand, usually so firm and commanding, trembles slightly as he reaches out, tracing the innocent face with a touch as tender as the faintest breeze brushing through autumn leaves. Each loss was not just a personal wound but a political tremor, threatening the delicate balance of dynastic continuity that governed the fate of kingdoms. This burden, a king's need for a pure, untainted heir, was a relentless weight pressing upon Philip. The purity of lineage was more than a tradition. It was a fortress against chaos. But purity is fragile, and the fear of impurity, of uncertain succession, shadows every whispered conversation in the royal chambers. You can almost hear the measured, cautious voices of courtiers speaking in low tones about marriage alliances, legitimacy, and the thin line between love and duty. Philip's fixation on heirs extended beyond mere numbers. It shaped the very fabric of his reign. The relentless quest for a pure lineage was a solitary suffering, an unspoken kind of obsession that isolated him even amid the grandeur of his court. He was bound by a paradox: the very human need to love and be loved, and the ruthless political necessity to ensure the survival of his dynasty, come what may. In the candle's flicker, you might glimpse the shadow of a man who, despite his power, was vulnerable, fragile as the parchment of a royal decree, delicate as the whispered prayers said over a sick child's bed. The royal duties demanded strength and decisiveness, yet the heart of this king was tender and at times deeply weary. You lie down with this awareness, the echoes of a king's silent sorrows mingling with the soft crackle of the fire. There's a strange comfort in knowing that even those who wear crowns are not immune to pain, that behind the gilded facades are lives marked by longing and loss. Philip's story is a slow, unfolding tapestry of ambition tempered by grief, desire shadowed by fear, and the quiet, relentless hope for continuity, woven softly, like the delicate threads of dawn's first light breaking through a long night. You find yourself wandering slowly through the dimly lit corridors of a sprawling royal palace, the air thick with the faint, lingering scent of sandalwood and aged parchment. The flickering candlelight casts long, wavering shadows on the stone walls, and you can almost hear the muted footsteps of the court physicians who once roamed these halls in quiet contemplation. These men, draped in heavy velvet robes embroidered with delicate gold thread, carried with them a solemn sense of responsibility, guardians not only of the king's health, but of his very bloodline. Imagine now that you are one of those court physicians, standing beside a heavy oak table strewn with medical texts, some older than the very dynasty you serve. You lean over a collection of wax tablets and carefully drawn portraits, your fingers brushing the smooth surface of a miniature painting of a prince. You notice something peculiar about the shape of his jaw, a distinct elongation, a slight protrusion of the chin that seems almost exaggerated under the glow of the flickering candle. This subtle but unmistakable feature had not gone unnoticed by your predecessors. They called it the Habsburg jaw, a term whispered among the medical attendants like a secret code. It was not just the odd shape that arrested attention. It was that this peculiar jawline seemed to thread its way through generation after generation of Habsburg royals. You realize, with a quiet kind of fascination, that this was a sign, an inherited trait passed down with an almost stubborn insistence. As you trace the family trees, rendered meticulously on vellum scrolls, you see the intricate web of marriages and alliances, many arranged to keep the bloodline pure. The interlocking loops and branches reveal repeated unions between cousins and distant relatives, a practice common among royal families, but fraught with risks that were only beginning to be understood in your time. You recall the gentle murmurs among the physicians about the fragile constitution of the royal children. Many of the little princes and princesses seemed smaller and weaker than one might expect, their cheeks pale, their breathing often shallow. It was as if the very vigor of the family's line was being quietly sapped, like a candle's flame flickering in a draught. The observations were more than mere conjecture. You and your colleagues began to notice patterns in the symptoms, in the ailments. Some children appeared prone to convulsions, others suffered from delayed developmental milestones, and a few were said to be simple of mind, a delicate phrase that obscured a more profound confusion. Bloodlines, once thought of as a source of unyielding strength and divine right, now seemed tangled in a quiet tragedy. The very practice of marrying within a closed circle to preserve royal purity was exacting a hidden toll. The Habsburg jaw was more than a physical oddity. It was the visible tip of an iceberg, a warning etched into bone and flesh. In the quiet moments, when you sat alone by the fire in your chamber, you would pore over the family records and medical reports, feeling a mixture of melancholy and curiosity. How had it come to this? Generations of carefully arranged marriages, of dynastic ambitions, had led to a curious fragility. The children, the future of kingdoms, were often too delicate to carry the heavy crowns intended for them. You imagine the conversations held in hushed tones within the inner chambers, physicians exchanging notes on bloodlines, on the strange facial features, on the increasing rarity of robust health among the young Habsburgs. There was an unspoken understanding that something was awry, but also a sense of helplessness. The science of heredity was in its infancy, and the mysteries of inherited traits were still shrouded in shadow. The physicians observed, recorded, and whispered about these patterns, their work a blend of careful scrutiny and cautious hope. They knew the stakes were high. After all, the health of a dynasty was intertwined with the stability of entire realms. The fragile children of the Habsburg lineage carried more than just their own bodies. They bore the weight of empires, alliances, and centuries of history. As you step away from the table of records, the scent of worn leather and dried ink lingers in the air. You glance once more at the portraits of the royal family, their faces frozen in time yet speaking volumes through the subtle details. The elongated jaws, the delicate features, the hints of frailty. In this quiet recollection, you recognize a story not just about a family, but about the human costs hidden beneath the grandeur of history. A story whispered from one generation to the next, told in the soft breath of candlelight and the steady hands of those who sought to understand. You step quietly through the heavy oak doors, the familiar creak beneath your worn slippers barely a murmur in the hushed corridors of the royal chambers. The air here is thick with the mingled scents of lavender and beeswax, the faintest trace of something smoky, perhaps the incense left burning to calm restless souls. Your hands, gentle but steady, carry a small basin of warm water scented with rose petals, the steam rising in delicate swirls that catch the flickering candlelight. There, in the dimly lit alcove, lies the child, draped in soft linens with the faintest pattern of embroidered stars. The little figure rests on a bed of down feathers and silken blankets, a tender cocoon amid the cold stone walls. You kneel beside them, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet. The child's limbs twist in ways that seem unnatural, curled and knotted like the roots of an ancient tree, folded into themselves as if trying to hide from the world. You run your fingers lightly along a small hand, the skin cool and smooth, yet with a subtle tension beneath, like a vine struggling against a cage. The flicker of candlelight casts shadows that dance across the walls, shifting like whispered secrets. Your breath comes calm and measured, a gentle rhythm against the silence. Outside, muffled voices drift through the corridors, low murmurs of courtiers, servants, and priests. The rumors ripple through the household like a restless breeze. The child's twisted limbs are not mere misfortune or illness, but a mark of divine displeasure, a punishment whispered by the gods themselves for some hidden transgression. You have heard the whispers before, the cautious glances exchanged when you step near, the way the priests clutch their beads a little tighter in your presence. But you know the truth is far quieter, more fragile than any sacred wrath. The child's body, delicate and contorted, tells a story of suffering and resilience rather than blame. Your hands, trained in the gentle art of healing, move with practiced care as you begin your ministrations. You unwrap a linen cloth, saturated in warm oil infused with herbs, sage to calm the spirit, fennel to ease the muscles. The scent rises warmly, mingling with the cooler air, wrapping around you and the child like a whispered lullaby. You begin to massage the twisted limbs slowly, clockwise, coaxing the stiff joints to relax, letting the child's fragile muscles breathe beneath your touch. The skin is soft, almost translucent, and you marvel quietly at the resilience nestled within such vulnerability. Your fingers trace the delicate arches of tiny feet curled inward, and you whisper promises only the shadows seem to hear. "You are safe here," you murmur in a voice so soft it's almost the wind stirring the curtains. "No gods will find fault where only love remains." The child's breath flutters, a fragile rhythm beneath your whispered words, as if responding to the quiet insistence of your care. Outside the chamber, candles flicker, their flames trembling like the whispered fears of those who do not understand. The priests may murmur of divine punishment, sending their prayers and fumigations to chase away evil spirits, but you know the truth is woven in the flesh itself. The slow unfolding of time, the delicate dance of bones and muscles shaped by fate rather than wrath. You carefully reposition the child, easing a pillow beneath their head, the soft rustle of linen, a gentle counterpoint to the steady drip of water from a nearby basin. Your eyes linger on the child's face, serene yet marked by the quiet weight of their burdens. The faintest flush colors their cheeks, a breath of life amid the stillness, while their lashes rest like miniature fans, casting soft shadows on porcelain skin. You close your eyes briefly and listen. The distant clatter of footsteps, the rustle of silk gowns, the soft murmur of voices, each a thread in the tapestry of this ancient place. Within these stone walls, time moves differently, slower, as if the world itself has hushed to cradle the fragile and the broken. Your hands return to the basin, dipping again into the warm water, gathering more of the herbal oil. The scent lingers, promising peace. You think of the child's parents, their faces etched with a complex blend of hope and resignation, caught between fear of the gods and the tender reality of their child's body. The court may whisper and wonder, but you alone bear witness to the quiet truth, the gentle persistence of care in the face of uncertainty, the soft light of kindness flickering through shadows of suspicion. You imagine the child's dreams, fragile and tender, like petals closed against a frosty dawn. Perhaps they dream of running through sun-dappled meadows, limbs free and unburdened, or of floating gently on a warm breeze, cradled by whispered songs of the wind. You hold these visions in your heart as you tend to their small form, a silent guardian weaving comfort from the threads of touch and scent and whispered promises. Here, in the stillness of the night, amidst the soft glow of candlelight and the faint hum of distant voices, you find a quiet refuge. The stories the priests tell, the fearful whispers of punishment, fall away like autumn leaves in a gentle rain. What remains is a simple truth, a child held tenderly in your care, a fragile light flickering in the depths of shadow, and the steady, unspoken hope that even the most twisted limbs may one day find their strength. You pause, your hands resting lightly on the child's arm, feeling the faintest pulse of life beneath your palms. The world outside may murmur of divine wrath, but here, in this quiet chamber, you whisper a different prayer, a hope for healing, a promise of gentle patience, and the soft embrace of unwavering kindness. You find yourself stepping softly into a quiet, dimly lit chamber, the kind where shadows cling to the corners, and the faint scent of beeswax from a flickering candle lingers in the air. This is the bedchamber of a queen long ago, and the faint rustle of silk and the distant murmur of attendants whisper secrets you are about to uncover. Here, in the midst of heavy drapes and the cool stone walls of a royal palace, a child was born, one who would come to embody a particular chapter in the curious history of royal lineage. The year is 1630, and you are present at the birth of Charles Stuart, the second son of King Charles I and Queen Henrietta Maria of England. Unlike the usual triumphant cries that might celebrate a royal heir, this birth was marked by quiet concern. The air is thick, heavy with the mingled scents of herbs and unguents, the tension palpable in the hushed voices of midwives and courtiers. The infant emerges pale and fragile, his body delicate and surprisingly misshapen under the soft folds of linen. The strong cries of new life are muted here, replaced by a soft, irregular breathing that hints at unseen struggles. You notice the infant's hands, small and gnarled, with fingers that seem vaguely twisted, as if the bone itself hesitated to take proper shape. His legs lie awkwardly, his limbs seeming weak and uncertain, as though the very foundation of his body lacked the usual vigor expected of a future monarch. His head, slightly misshapen, carries an odd tilt, subtle, but enough that those paying close attention whisper about a delicate skull and fragile health. Despite the elaborate comfort of velvet cushions and the warmth of glowing hearth fires, the baby's skin carries a pallor more akin to porcelain than the rosy hue of vitality. His lips part in little gasps, and you almost imagine the thin pulse beneath his tiny wrist, faint and faltering. The midwives exchange glances tinged with unease, their hands gentle but cautious as they wrap the child in soft, swaddling cloth, hoping to protect what feels so fragile. In this stillness, you can almost hear the heavy footsteps echoing down the marble halls, those of a king who will someday look at this small, fragile boy and see both promise and burden intertwined. For Charles II was, from his first breath, a reminder of the complex and sometimes perilous nature of royal bloodlines, where the desire to keep power within a tight circle often came at a cost scarcely visible beneath layers of silk and ceremony. The queen, her face pale and drawn, presses a delicate hand to her lips, whispering a prayer bathed in candlelight. The faint scent of lavender and rose fills the room, mingling with the faint metallic tang of medicine and the earthiness of damp stone. All around, the palace holds its breath, as if the walls themselves are uncertain of what the future holds for this small, sickly prince. As you lie beside this moment, feeling the soft rustle of fabric and the gentle warmth of the cradle, you realize that Charles's arrival was not heralded by the fanfare of perfect health, but by a quiet fragility. It is the beginning of a life marked by physical challenges, a body that bore the marks of generations of carefully arranged unions and whispered alliances. The royal blood coursing through his veins was thick with the weight of history, and his fragile form was the first, tender sign of how that history could etch itself upon flesh. And so, here in this still, dusky room scented with incense and solemn hopes, Charles Stuart came into the world, a pale, weak child swathed in linens and expectations, the first breath of a story woven from the curious threads of royal inbreeding, whispered secrets, and the delicate balance of power and vulnerability. You settle deeper into your pillow's embrace, the room dim and quiet except for the faint flicker of candlelight casting slow-moving shadows on the walls. Imagine yourself stepping back in time, slipping quietly into the cramped, stone-walled chamber where he spent most of his days. The air is cool but heavy, a stillness interrupted only by the soft rustle of worn fabric and the occasional creak of wooden beams overhead. Here his world unfolds, one marked by subtle, persistent suffering that touches every breath he takes. You watch him from a distance, noting the slight tilt of his head, the way his jaw seems reluctant to find its place. The words he tries to speak emerge like fragile whispers, hardly more than a strained rustling of leaves caught in a gentle wind. His tongue, small and uncertain, struggles to navigate the complex dance of speech. Sentences begin, then falter. Sounds slip away before they are fully formed, leaving him trapped in a silence that is louder than any cry. This inability to communicate, so basic yet so vital, wraps around him like a shroud. You can almost hear the frustration humming just beneath his skin, a quiet storm held in place by invisible chains. He attempts to walk, but his legs betray him. Each careful step is a negotiation between determination and pain. The muscles, weak and uncooperative, tremble beneath his thin skin. His feet, sensitive to the cold stone of the floor, find no steady rhythm, stumbling slightly as if the ground itself were shifting beneath him. You imagine the exhaustion that must come with every movement, the slow-burning fatigue that seeps deep into his bones. To stand, to move, to simply exist in a body that refuses to obey. It's a quiet kind of torment, one that wears down the spirit even more than the flesh. Meals are no comfort here. You watch the small bowl set before him, its contents unassuming, soft bread, a thin broth, perhaps a bit of stewed fruit. But to him, eating is an ordeal. The act that should bring nourishment and ease instead invites discomfort. His stomach, unsettled and rebellious, tightens and churns against the simple fare. The food seems to linger, stubborn and unwelcome, as if the body cannot quite accept it. You sense the weight of this failure, the hunger that remains unsated, the promise of strength that never arrives. The hunger is not just physical but profoundly lonely, a reminder of all the things his body cannot do for him. You lean closer, almost feeling the faint, bitter taste of bile that he must swallow down along with his meals. The air around him is tinged with the faintest echo of incense, perhaps an attempt to mask the subtle, relentless scent of indigestion. It mingles with the mustiness of old stone and the faint musk of candle smoke curling toward the low ceiling. Even in this small, enclosed space, there is a sense of vast internal struggle, a quiet battle waged behind closed lips and shadowed eyes. Emotion flickers across his face like candlelight, sometimes a brief glimmer of hope, sometimes a shadow that lingers too long. You sense the weight of isolation pressing down, not just from others, but from within himself. The body he inhabits is both a prison and a battleground, limiting his movements, muffling his voice, and sapping his strength. Yet within those quiet moments, there is also something deeply human, a persistence, a fragile thread of will that refuses to snap. He gazes out a narrow window, where the sky shifts gently from dusk to night, the last light falling softly on his pale skin. You imagine the stories he might wish to tell, the thoughts trapped behind lips that cannot quite shape them. The world beyond seems distant and unreachable, like a dream fading at the edges. And yet, here in this room, with its flickering shadows and whispered silences, his daily life unfolds, a tapestry woven from threads of pain, resilience, and an unspoken longing for ease. You breathe slowly, feeling the rhythm of his quiet struggle echo in the stillness around you. It is not a tale of grandeur or triumph, but rather a delicate portrait of human fragility. And as you lie back, letting your eyelids grow heavy, you carry with you the soft, haunting sense of a life lived on the edge of words, steps, and fleeting comfort. You find yourself in a dimly lit chamber, the soft flicker of candlelight casting undulating shadows on ancient stone walls. The air is thick with the faint scent of burning tallow mingled with something less tangible, an aura of whispered secrets and unspoken fears. Here, in this quiet corner of history, you begin to unravel the story of a man whose life was marked by unions as quiet and enigmatic as his reign. He married twice. Neither union brought the laughter of children, those small, restless footprints echoing through the halls. The first bride, a woman of noble blood and gentle demeanor, arrived like a soft breeze stirring the heavy velvet curtains. Their wedding was a subdued affair, hushed beneath the watchful eyes of courtiers who exchanged glances, unsettled by the absence of warmth between the couple. She was a figure almost ghost-like, moving silently through the chambers, her presence more a shadow than a blaze of light. Their bond, if it could be called that, was more formal than affectionate, a treaty written in whispered promises and duty rather than tender words. The second marriage came after a quiet interval, like the slow turning of seasons in a forgotten garden. This bride was different, more vivacious in her youth perhaps, but the same absence of offspring followed them. The palace, with its cold stone corridors, grew ever quieter under their joint rule. You can almost hear the soft rustle of silk gowns trailing over the marble floors, the muted conversation turning to speculation. What could explain this king and his two marriages without heirs? What mystery lay? In his silent chambers, behind the mask of a ruler whose power was more shadow than substance. His kingship itself was a peculiar thing. It was power in name alone, a crown resting lightly on a head bowed more by circumstance than authority. The great halls of his palace, once echoing with the commands of a sovereign, now hummed with uncertainty and quiet whispers. He was king, yes, but the strings of governance were pulled elsewhere, by hands more forceful, more determined. You imagine him seated alone in a high-backed chair, the weight of his crown pressing down like a secret he could neither share nor escape. His rule was a stage set for others, while he played the part of a monarch ensnared in invisible chains. The courtiers and townsfolk alike searched for explanations in the silence, in the cold absence of heirs, in the soft-spoken king, who seemed more an enigma than a ruler. Rumors began to ripple through the castle like smoke drifting from a dying fire. Whispers of sorcery danced along the stone walls, weaving tales that clung to the musty tapestries. Some claimed he consorted with devils, drawing on dark powers because no human mind could fathom his peculiar nature. You can almost hear the barely audible hiss of those accusations, carried in hushed tones behind closed doors. A kind of fearful fascination with a man who existed just out of reach, like a half-remembered dream. No one could quite explain him. The childless marriages, the powerless kingship, the veiled presence in the court, all these became threads in a tapestry embroidered with suspicion and awe. Yet as you lie back and let these stories fold around you like a soft blanket, you might sense something else beneath the surface. A man caught between worlds, neither fully king nor fully subject, drifting through the ages like a shadow among shadows, forever misunderstood, forever silent. You settle into your worn wooden chair by the narrow window, the faint amber light from a dying candle flickering across the rough parchment before you. The room smells faintly of dried ink and old wood, a scent that has become inseparable from your very breath. Outside, the courtyard lies cloaked in a deep, velvety dusk, where shadows stretch long and unmoving. You can hear the soft rustle of drifting leaves, carrying with them the last whispers of a summer that refuses to let go. Your fingers, stained with soot and ink, hover hesitantly above the parchment, the quill feeling heavier than usual. Each stroke seems to carry the weight of a world unraveling. You are the scribe, the silent witness to a dynasty's slow and painful decline. Your role, once filled with the simple dignity of recording edicts and ceremonies, has now become a solemn duty, documenting the silence growing louder with every passing day. You catch the faintest, ragged cough from the chamber beyond. It is not the cough of a common illness, but one that cracks and echoes like brittle glass beneath the palace's stone arches. You have heard it before, that fragile sound seizing the throat of the old emperor. The cough lingers like a persistent shadow, each rasping breath a fracture in the once unyielding foundation of the dynasty. You dip your quill into the inkwell, its surface catching the flicker of the candlelight, dark and glistening like a pool of stormy water. Your hand moves slowly, almost reluctantly, as you write. The emperor's breath grows shallow, and with each labored exhale, the empire shudders. You pause, the words settling over you like a gentle, suffocating fog. The chamber's door creaks ever so slightly, and you can almost imagine the faint outline of the emperor reclining behind its heavy oak, draped in robes too thin for his fevered skin. You can almost smell the faint, medicinal scent of herbs and incense, mingling uneasily with the stale, humming silence. You remember when the halls were filled with the sounds of laughter and the clatter of swords, when the dynasty's banners fluttered proudly in the breeze, bright with colors that seemed to hold the promise of eternity. Now those sounds have faded to whispers, and the banners hang limp, their edges frayed and pale. The palace itself feels like a living creature growing old, its stones seeped with the memories of triumphs and betrayals alike. There is a stillness in the air that you can almost touch, the space between heartbeats, the quiet before the inevitable. You listen closely, tuning in to the subtle symphony of decline, the soft groan of wooden beams settling, the distant murmur of worried courtiers, and most hauntingly, the emperor's coughing, each one a fragile shudder shaking the very air you breathe. Your reflection shimmers weakly in the window pane, framed by the curling tendrils of smoke from your candle. You notice how the lines on your own face have deepened, how time and wear have marked you as an unwilling chronicler of an unraveling world. It feels strange, this intimacy with decay, watching history not as a distant tale but as a slow, aching rupture in the fabric of your daily life. You lower your quill and lean back, the chair creaking beneath you. The parchment before you bears the weight of your final entries, words that will outlast your trembling hand, and the breaths of the mortal who now fades behind those ancient doors. You wonder if future eyes will find solace in your quiet record, or if they will see only the tragedy of a dynasty gasping for air. A distant bell tolls, its sound hollow and measured, like a heartbeat slowing with deliberate calm. You close your eyes for a moment, allowing the softness of the night to cradle your thoughts. In the darkness, you almost hear the Emperor's voice, faint and fragmented, a whispered plea caught in the gaps between coughs, lost beneath generations of stone and sorrow. You breathe in the cool night air drifting through the narrow window, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and fading roses. The world outside continues, indifferent and vast, while inside these walls, history holds its breath. With a final, steadying sip of air, you dip your quill once more, tracing the Emperor's last days with the gentle care of a hand closing a book long overdue for rest. Each word is a soft step toward the inevitable silence, a tender marking of an end whispered not in thunder, but in the fading echoes of a cough. You lie back gently, allowing your eyes to drift closed as a soft hush settles around you, like a velvet blanket wrapping you in a world far away from the bustle of today. Imagine now, stepping quietly into an ancient, dimly lit chamber somewhere deep within a vast, cold castle. The air is thick with the scent of flickering candle wax and faint traces of old parchment, mingling with the ever-present hint of stone walls, slowly absorbing centuries of whispered secrets and muffled footsteps. Here in this secluded corner of history, generations have passed under a quiet, unyielding shadow, one woven from the tightly knit threads of family and blood. You can almost sense the gentle pressure of isolation pressing in, a weight heavier than stone, heavier than the thick tapestries hanging on these walls, designed to keep out the cold and, more silently, the outside world. The stories you are invited to listen to are not just those of medical curiosities or inherited traits scribbled in dusty ledgers by scholars long gone. No, these are the subtle, sorrowful tales of emotional solitude, of lives restrained by invisible chains of control and expectation. When you think of inbreeding, you might first picture the clinical side, the genetic risks, the mutations, the visible marks of generations repeating themselves like a somber echo through time. But beyond the science lies a deeper narrative, one that touches the heart and stirs a quiet ache. Imagine the young faces framed by candlelight, their eyes reflecting not only the solemnity of their duties, but the loneliness that creeps in when your world is confined to the same faces, the same bloodlines, over and over. Each generation tightly bound to the one before, like a looped thread in an endless tapestry, unable to break free or reach beyond the heavy walls of their lineage. It is a life defined by repetition, not just of genes, but of the same whispered conversations behind closed doors, the same cautious glances cast across stone corridors, the same unspoken understanding that stepping outside the carefully constructed web might bring ruin. Control was the quiet ruler here, dictating not only who you might marry or procreate with, but also which dreams could dare to bloom. Curiosity was tempered, freedom curtailed, and the heart's yearning often left to simmer beneath the surface, like an ember just waiting for a breath it might never receive. The isolation was as physical as it was emotional. Nobles and royals, their bloodlines guarded like precious relics. lived in chambers that both shielded and imprisoned them. Their lives, though gilded with wealth and adorned with finery, were circumscribed by codes older than the stone itself. To stray was to risk not merely scandal, but the fragile balance of power delicately maintained by generations of careful stewardship. You might envision the long nights, the flickering shadows dancing on tapestries, and the soft rustle of silk gowns as ladies and gentlemen moved like ghosts through halls too vast and empty for laughter. Inside these walls, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken desires and restrained hopes, each generation inheriting not only physical traits, but also the heavy burden of expectation and the quiet ache of solitude. The emotional weight of this world is often overlooked because it is subtle, felt more than seen. It whispers in the silence between carefully arranged marriages, in the veiled glances exchanged at court, and in the private moments when a young noble might wonder about a life beyond the cold, echoing halls. There is an almost sacred melancholy to it, a longing that lingers like the soft scent of incense drifting through a chapel's nave. So, as you settle deeper into the quiet night, let yourself feel the delicate sadness woven through these stories of old. The generations of inbreeding were not merely a matter of medical consequence, but also of hearts quietly constricted by isolation and control. It is an emotional landscape painted in muted tones, shadows stretching long across stone floors, the gentle shiver of silk on marble, and the faintest sigh carried on a draught whispering through ancient corridors. This is the human cost beneath the surface, the tender ache of lives lived in circles too small and walls too high, where freedom was a distant, unreachable dream, and love, though present, was often veiled beneath layers of duty and restraint. In this quiet reflection, you may find a strange comfort, knowing that even in the most constrained of circumstances, the heart finds ways to endure quietly and persistently, like a single candle flickering against the dark. You find yourself walking slowly along a narrow, winding path, the evening mist curling around your ankles like whispered secrets. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and faint smoke from distant hearths. As you approach the humble village nestled against the shadowed forest, you notice how the wooden homes lean quietly into the darkness, as if even they wish to avoid drawing attention. Here, beneath the heavy weight of an ancient monarchy, the common folk lived in a delicate balance of awe, obedience, and quiet fear. You step inside one of the small cottages, where the fire's glow flickers softly against rough stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows. A woman sits near the hearth, hands folded in her lap, her eyes weary yet watchful. You settle beside her, feeling the cool breath of the night whisper through the cracked window pane. She begins to speak, her voice low and steady, as if reluctant to stir. The sleeping darkness with tales that are best left unspoken. The royals, she says, are not like us. They are different, not just because of their fine clothes or their grand halls, but because they carry a curse. Her eyes dart briefly to the shadows, as if the very walls might be listening. It's said that their blood is tainted, that they are marked by something old and terrible, and those of us who dwell below them know to keep our distance. You imagine the king, seated high upon his throne, a figure carved in gold and velvet, yet shadowed by whispers darker than night itself. The stories tell of eyes that bleed without wound or reason, deep crimson tears seeping down pale cheeks, staining the silken robes like the touch of a hidden sorrow. People say these bleeding eyes are not just a strange ailment, but a sign, a portent of doom, or a manifestation of secret guilt. the visible proof of a curse no physician can cleanse. The woman's voice softens further. It begins, they say, with the eyes. Once the bleeding starts, the royal is changed. Their gaze becomes something to fear, piercing, haunted, as if they see beyond the veil that separates this world from the next. She pulls her shawl tighter, the rough wool scratching gently against her skin, grounding her to the present as if to ward off the shadows creeping down the corners of the room. You listen closely, the crackle of the fire blending with the faint rustle of the night outside. But it's not only the eyes, she continues. There's the stuttering tongue, too. The king, the queen, sometimes a prince or princess, they begin to speak strangely, words slipping from their lips in a hesitant dance, as though some unseen force trips them up. It's not mere nervousness. It's as if the curse gnaws at their voice, making their speech stumble and falter like a broken spell. You imagine royal courtiers exchanging uneasy glances as their sovereigns struggle to form sentences, the once commanding voice now a fragile whisper. The court, filled with polished marble and heavy velvet curtains, conceals beneath its grandeur a silent unease. The common folk, outside those walls, interpret these signs with a mixture of dread and dark fascination, omens that their rulers are drifting ever closer into shadows they cannot escape. The woman's gaze turns distant, and you follow her eyes to the flickering flames. And then the children. The royal line is cursed in its very blood. Many mothers speak in hushed tones of stillborn babes, of infants that never breathed the air of this world. Her hands tremble slightly, the rough texture of the wood beneath them grounding her trembling spirit. Such losses are kept secret, hidden behind heavy curtains and whispered prayers. But we always hear. You feel a chill, soft as the breath of night, as you imagine the royal nurseries, rooms heavy with the scent of incense and lavender, where pale infants lie silent. And cold. Nurses and wet nurses move silently, careful not to disturb the fragile balance between life and death. Each stillbirth is a wound not just to the royal family but a dark stain on the crown itself, proof, to the superstitious eye, of an ancient, restless curse. Outside, the village is settling into silence, the night growing deeper and more absolute. You breathe in the mingled scents of smoke and damp stone, feeling the weight of these whispered fears pressing gently against your skin like a soft fog. The woman's face is calm now, resigned almost, as if she has passed these stories down through generations. Tales meant to be told softly, so they might sink into the shadows without waking the old fears too fully. The curse, she says finally, is not just something to be feared. It is something that marks the royals as other, forever apart from the rest of us. And so we watch them, with eyes narrowed and hearts cautious, because we know the crown carries more than power. It carries pain and sorrow, and a darkness that no light can fully erase. You nod slowly, understanding not just the stories themselves, but the quiet truth they hold, how fear and reverence weave together in the minds of those who live beneath the gaze of crowns. Outside, the wind sighs gently through the trees, and you lie back on the earth for a moment, feeling the pulse of history beneath your fingertips. Here, in the stillness, the ancient tales settle quietly like dust, ready to drift away into sleep. As you settle deeper into your quiet space, imagine tracing the faint, delicate outlines of distant royal courts, flickering like candlelight through the veils of time. In this dim, gentle glow, you drift toward the world of European dynasties, each one a quiet echo of ambition, ceremony, and legacy. The Habsburgs of Spain, however, stand apart, their story woven with threads a little darker, a little more intricate, a little more relentless. Picture the Habsburgs, their hands resting heavily on the map of a sprawling empire. Their kingdom sprawled like a slow-moving ocean, with territories scattered across continents, from the cool mists of the Netherlands to the sun-baked shores of the Americas. They held onto power with a grip both fascinating and forbidding, a grip that sometimes cut deeper than others. The Habsburg jaw, famed and almost emblematic of their lineage, was more than a genetic quirk. It was a visible mark, a whispered symbol of the complicated balance they tried to maintain. The physical manifestation of their persistence to keep bloodlines pure, a reflection of their intense, sometimes suffocating devotion to dynastic continuity. Now, gently, your thoughts float over to Austria, the heartland of the Habsburg dynasty long before Spain's shine. Here, among the Baroque palaces and whispering forests, the Habsburgs ruled with a quieter dignity. Their empire was a patchwork of diverse peoples and places, stitched together not by iron hand alone, but with an artful diplomacy subdued by the halls of Vienna. The Austrian Habsburgs were meticulous gardeners of their realm, pruning alliances and marriages with a measured hand. They sowed seeds of unity among many tongues and faiths, nurturing a sprawling mosaic that, while complex, embraced a certain elegance and restraint. Their approach was, in many ways, a slow, deliberate waltz rather than a rapid march. Political marriages were frequent, yes, but rarely did they reach the extremes seen in Spain. The Austrian line was persistent, patient, and careful to avoid the genetic pitfalls that later weighed so heavily on their Spanish cousins. Their embrace of diversity was less a grand statement and more a pragmatic acceptance, a quiet acknowledgement that their empire's strength lay in its subtle variety. Across the gentle hills and winding rivers of France, another story unravels, one of regal splendor and revolutionary undercurrents. The French Bourbons held court with a dazzling flair, lighting up the world with Versailles' radiant halls, its mirrored galleries reflecting candlelight like stars suspended indoors. Their rule was marked by a grand theatricality, a delicate dance of power and pageantry. Yet beneath that glittering surface, the Bourbon dynasty bore burdens of its own, intense rivalries, intrigue, and the weighty expectations of an absolute monarchy. The Bourbons' grip on power was fierce, but sometimes brittle, like fine porcelain exposed to sudden shocks. Their penchant for centralization and grandeur often masked the fragility simmering just beneath. Unlike the Habsburgs of Spain, who sought to bind their empire through blood ties and religious unity, the French kings leaned heavily on spectacle and the cultivation of loyalty through grandeur and the arts. Their lineage was less about the preservation of a single bloodline and more about the radiance of royal authority as a living symbol. Yet, even with their splendor and the stormy tides of revolution that would one day sweep through France, their dynasty did not become the cautionary tale of genetic obsession and decline that marks the Spanish Habsburgs. The Bourbons weathered the storms of history with a different kind of resilience, one forged in the fires of political upheaval rather than in the quiet shadow of inherited infirmities. As you let these portraits drift softly in your mind's eye, the Spanish Habsburgs emerge once more, their tale tinged with a certain tragic singularity. They were the most extreme of their age and place, not just in their territorial ambitions, but in the veiled corridors of their own bloodline. Their fixation on dynastic purity was relentless, a slow, creeping shadow cast over generations. You can almost feel the cool stone walls of their palaces, thick with the scent of incense and aged parchment, holding whispered secrets of marriages arranged with painstaking precision, a web tightening with each passing decade. This obsession wasn't merely about power. It was about survival, about the hope that their line would continue unbroken, unmarred by outsiders. But nature, as it often does, whispered a different story back. The genetic consequences of such insularity left their mark, not just on their bodies, but on the fate of their empire itself. The Spanish Habsburgs became a living testament to the delicate balance between ambition and vulnerability, a dynasty where persistence morphed into a kind of quiet tragedy. So as you lie back, letting your thoughts wander through these shadowed halls and sunlit gardens of Europe's royal families, you might find a curious peace in knowing that even the mightiest dynasties had their peculiar fragilities. The Austrian Habsburgs, with their careful dance through diversity and diplomacy, the French Bourbons, with their flair for spectacle and revolutionary endurance, and the Spanish Habsburgs, with their intense, sometimes overwhelming commitment to bloodline and faith, all are threads in a vast, intricate tapestry of history. Each dynasty carried its own blend of grandeur and subtle sorrow, but it is the Spanish Habsburgs who remain the most extreme, their story echoing softly like a whispered lullaby, beautiful, haunting, and just a little bittersweet. As you drift gently toward sleep, you step quietly through the grand, cavernous halls of the palace, now hushed as if it were holding its breath. The air is thick with that peculiar stillness that only places long abandoned by laughter and footsteps can hold, a heavy, gentle silence that swallows even the faintest creaks of settling timber or the distant drip of water somewhere deeper within the stone walls. It feels like the palace itself has folded in on itself, drawing back into shadows like a creature curling up to sleep after a long, weary day. Your footsteps are muffled against the worn flagstones, smooth from centuries of bare feet and polished leather. Along the walls, rows of portraits hang under layers of dusky grime, their surfaces matte and cracked, like parchment left too long by candlelight. The extravagant frames, once gilded and gleaming, have dulled to a muted bronze, their intricate carvings swallowed by dust and shadow. The silence seems to make the eyes of these painted figures all the more watchful, as if they keep vigil over the empty corridors. You pause for a moment before the first portrait, a heavy canvas that leans slightly from its nail. The figure wears the heavy robes of nobility, the fabric rendered in thick, oil-painted folds that seem to absorb the faint light like velvet. His jaw is wide and square, almost too large to be natural, jutting forward with a stubborn kind of authority. His lips, thin and drawn tight, are set in a faintly disapproving line. His eyes, drooping at the corners, stare not quite at you but somewhere beyond, as if weighed down by the burden of endless expectations. You imagine the slow, tired sigh that must have accompanied his final days, a man who bore his crown like a heavy chain rather than a triumph. Your gaze drifts along the gallery. Each portrait tells a silent story, faces marked by the passage of time, features softened by years but carrying a peculiar sameness, as though the traits of power and weariness were passed down like an heirloom. A woman draped in pearls and lace, her expression reserved and distant, her eyes shadowed with the quiet knowledge of secrets best left unspoken. A young man, barely more than a boy, his cheeks flushed with the pink of youth but his eyes already weary, perhaps dreaming of a freedom the palace would never grant him. The colors have long since faded from their cheeks, leaving only muted tones of ochre and umber. Yet, despite the dust and neglect, These figures seem to linger in the thick, hushed air, like ghosts trapped behind glass. You can almost smell the faint trace of old oils and resins used in the paint, mingling with the heavy scent of damp stone and aged wood that fills the palace like a memory. You run your fingers lightly along the wall, tracing the cool, rough texture of plaster beneath your palm. The silence presses in around you, not a scream or a clash of swords, but a soft, final sigh that seems to settle like a brittle leaf drifting to rest. It's the sigh of a lineage that folded quietly into history, the bloodline ending not with violence, but with the slow, inevitable fading of time's soft hand. You imagine the last of the family moving through these halls, perhaps a solitary figure pausing before a hearth that no longer burns, a hand resting briefly on a cold banister worn smooth by generations. The echoes of whispered conversations, the rustle of silk gowns, the clink of silverware at long-forgotten banquets, all now reduced to nothing more than a faint, trembling memory in the stones themselves. And yet in this stillness there is something profoundly tender, almost reverent. The palace doesn't shout its history, it whispers it, in breaths too soft for most to hear. It holds its stories carefully, like a cherished secret folded into the creases of faded wallpaper or the cracks of ancient tiles. As you continue your slow passage down the corridor, the portraits seem to watch you go, their faces frozen in time, bearing witness to the quiet surrender of a dynasty. No roar of rebellion, no final battle cry, only the gentle curtain falling, the last page turning softly in a book left on a bedside table. You take a deep breath, the cool, still air filling your lungs, and for a moment you let yourself feel the weight of absence, the delicate hush where once there was life. The bloodline ended with a sigh, not a scream, and the palace, like a patient old friend, remains, a silent keeper of stories whispered in shadow and dust. You lie back gently, allowing your thoughts to drift like the faint flicker of candlelight stretched long against ancient stone walls. Imagine now a chamber, vast yet still, where the air carries a weight both invisible and profound. The scent of beeswax candles mingles with the faint, dry aroma of worn tapestries and old parchment, fragrances that time has pressed quietly into the fabric of memory. Here, centuries ago, a royal dream began to unravel, not with the clashing of swords or the triumphant banners waving in the wind, but in a hushed silence that choked the hopes of an empire. You step inside this quiet room where a man lies, his breath shallow and irregular, the flickering shadows dancing softly across his pale face. This once powerful figure, once the heartbeat of grand ambitions and sprawling plans, is now reduced to a fragile whisper of himself. His eyes, those windows of fierce will and sparkling intelligence, struggle to find focus. His lips, which once commanded armies and enthralled courts, have grown still, sealed by an illness that steals words as deftly as a thief steals silver in the night. This was no grand finale marked by the clangor of victory or the triumphant cries of conquest. Rather, it was a slow, steady fading, a retreat not from the battlefield but from the very essence of communication, leadership, and presence. The royal dream did not collapse amid triumphant triumphs or rancorous defeat, but dissolved quietly, wrapped in the cruel stillness of a body betrayed by sickness. You imagine the room steeped in the soft glow of twilight, the heavy curtains drawn to keep out the harshness of midday sun, which might disturb the fragile peace. The attendants move like shadows themselves, careful not to rouse the fragile sovereign. Their steps are soft, barely there, as if the slightest noise could shatter the tenuous thread between life and oblivion. Incense curls lazily from an ornate burner, its delicate smoke weaving through the air in lazy spirals, carrying with it a hint of myrrh and frankincense. Aromas once treasured for their ability to comfort the soul and ward off the shadows of despair. Outside, beyond the fortified walls, the pulse of the kingdom beats on, indifferent to the slow extinguishing of one man's reign. The courtiers, the generals, the scribes, all murmur anxiously in the background, the air thick with uncertainty. What does it mean for a kingdom when its king cannot speak? When his voice, the sovereign's most potent weapon, the living seal of authority, is hushed not by defeat but by disease? You can almost hear the faint rustle of silk gowns and whispered counsel, the subtle exchange of glances weighed down by worry and veiled ambition. They stand at the crossroads of history, watching as the grand designs carved in marble and ink begin to blur. The royal dream, once a shining beacon of conquest and unity, now flickers like a dying flame in a drafty hall. You press your hand gently to the cool, carved wood of a nearby table, feeling the worn edges smoothed by generations of restless fingers. Documents filled with meticulous script lie scattered, maps dotted with campaigns never completed, treaties never signed. Each piece of parchment holds a fragment of hope, now tinged with the bittersweet scent of loss. It is a quiet kind of tragedy, the one that slips in without fanfare, claiming the promise of greatness through the slow theft of voice and vitality. In those final days, the king who once dreamed in thunderous proclamations and sweeping visions is reduced to a prisoner within his own flesh, trapped in a silence heavier than the thickest velvet curtains that drape the windows. The court hears only his heavy breathing, the faint, uneven rhythm of a heart stubbornly beating against the tide of decrepitude. You imagine the attendants around him, loyal eyes that refuse to blink away the painful truth, hands that brush damp foreheads, murmurs of hope and sorrow blending into the dim, candlelit air. This is a tender moment suspended in time, where history whispers not of triumph, but of human fragility. The mighty are suddenly very small, their dreams fragile as the delicate threads of a spider's web catching morning dew. You feel the weight of this silence, thick and almost tactile, as it settles over the room, a quiet shroud that demands reflection rather than celebration. And so, the royal dream ended, not with the clamor of conquest or the blaze of glory, but with a sick man who could no longer speak. His silence was not defeat in the traditional sense, but a profound loss nonetheless, a retreat into shadows where once there had been light and purpose. In this gentle quiet, you are invited to lean in close, to listen to the soft sighs of history, and to feel the strange beauty of a story that ends not with a roar, but with a whisper. You lie back gently, as if sinking into a soft bed of time itself, and you notice how the air around you feels thick with quiet stories. The faint flicker of candlelight stretches long, warm shadows across the walls, and you can almost see the dust particles drifting lazily through the glow, each one a tiny, drifting mote of history. They settle slowly, without rush, quiet witnesses to centuries of whispered secrets, of lives lived and forgotten, of bloodlines winding their way through the dim corridors of the past. Blood isn't destiny, they say, not quite. It doesn't decree your fate with an iron hand, nor does it write your story in unbreakable ink. Yet still, beneath the surface, that ancient current hums softly, like a low murmur beneath a pond's still skin. It's a whisper, subtle and persistent, that threads through generations. It is the echo of names you might have never known, of faces long gone, of deeds both gentle and grim. Quiet as breath, it exhales through your veins, reminding you, gently and persistently, where you come from, even when you try to turn away. Imagine the slow turning of a weathered parchment, rough beneath your fingertips, whispering tales inked long ago. The words are worn at the edges, like the faint scars of stories that have been told and retold, softened by the kindness of time. Like those fragile pages, your bloodline is a delicate thread, frayed in places, tangled in others, woven with 1,000 small moments. A touch, glance, a whispered promise. It is not a cage, but it is a map drawn in the dim light of memory. It stretches out, sometimes clear, sometimes blurred and beautiful in its mystery. As the candle burns low, the shadows lengthen and deepen. The quiet whispering of your ancestors drifts through the quiet air like incense smoke curling in slow spirals. It is a scent that is too old to name, a mixture of earth and stone, old leather and forgotten libraries. It fills the room with a subtle, trembling presence, the invisible weight of those who came before and the soft gravity of their choices, their hearts, their longings. You feel yourself settle into this place between waking and dreaming, where the past is neither heavy nor pressing, but simply there, like the gentle patter of rain on a window pane. It taps out rhythms you almost recognize, pieces of a song half remembered, filling the silence between your breaths. Blood doesn't demand allegiance, but it does call you softly, like an old friend whose voice is muffled by the years and the quiet hush of night. In this calm, suspended moment, the unchangeable nature of your origin relaxes into stillness. You are not bound to the deeds or the sorrows of those who came before. You are not shackled to their mistakes or triumphs. Instead, you are invited into a conversation with them, slow, thoughtful, and patient. The past settles around you like dust in a sunbeam, gentle and unobtrusive, a soft reminder and a fading echo. Your fingers brush over smooth stone, cool and unyielding beneath your touch, much like the unyielding truth of lineage. Something solid, present, but not suffocating. It holds you up like the steady foundation of a quiet house on a calm street. You listen to the silence that follows, the gentle pause between stories, and in that silence the choice is yours. How to carry the whisper, how to let it guide you or fade into the comfortable quiet. And as you breathe in this stillness, you feel the candle's warmth soften your skin, the amber light wrapping you in a gentle embrace. The past, with all its tangled threads, settles like dust in the soft glow, resting quietly, respectfully, without hurry or demand. It is a presence that lingers softly, a whispered invitation to remember, but never to be bound. Here, in this moment suspended between light and shadow, you hold both freedom and heritage, a delicate balance, as fragile and enduring as the flickering flame itself. And with the whisper of blood in your ears, you drift deeper into night, cradled by the slow, quiet unfolding of history's gentle breath. The candlelight flickers softly now, shadows wavering gently like hushed whispers on delicate parchment. The grand hall, once echoing with restless footsteps and whispered plots, lies silent, as if the very stones have sighed in relief. You breathe in slowly, the faint scent of aged wood and a trace of lavender drifting through the cool evening air. Outside, the world has settled into a hush, and inside, the throne sits empty, a quiet monument to a story finally at rest. There is something profoundly soothing about this emptiness. No clamor of power, no rustle of silk or clank of armor disturbs the stillness. The seat where ambitions once burned now holds only shadows, light and dark dancing softly across the worn tapestry of history. Imagine resting your tired spirit beside it, feeling the cool stone beneath your fingertips, grounding you in this moment where the madness has ebbed away, leaving only calm. You lie down gently, as if settling into a bed of moss beneath an ancient oak, the moonlight spilling through imagined leaves above. It's a place free from turbulence, free from the ceaseless tides of conquest and betrayal. Here, the heavy veil of history lifts, revealing a quiet dawn, untouched by the chaos that once churned beneath it. The stories you've wandered through tonight have been long, winding, sometimes strange, but now they fade into the soft folds of night like a whispered lullaby. Your eyes grow heavy, the weight of countless centuries pressing softly but kindly upon them. The echoes of distant voices mellow into a gentle hum, a timeless rhythm that tugs you toward stillness. The empty throne invites no demands, no expectations, only the serene promise of rest. You watch the shadows lengthen and meld, the world narrowing to the simple pulse of your own breath, slow and steady as a tide retreating to a calm shore. There's a subtle magic in this emptiness, a quiet grace in the absence of power and ambition. The stories that once seemed so urgent and fierce now lie folded away like petals closing at dusk, their edges soft and worn. The madness is over. The great wheel that spun so wildly has ground to a gentle stop. And in this stillness, you find a place to breathe, to soften, to drift. Perhaps you can feel it too, that gentle pull towards sleep, the invitation to let go of history's weight and surrender to the quiet dark. The throne is empty and you are free to rest. Close your eyes slowly. Let your mind wander into the shadows where stories whisper softly, where time flows like a slow river through the night. Sleep now, history watcher. The tales have been told, the chapters closed. In this moment, only peace remains, wrapped around you like a warm, familiar cloak. Drift into the gentle night. The world will wait. And when you awaken, the endless dance of history will be there still. But for now, the throne holds only quiet, and you hold only rest. You've wandered through the whispering corridors of time, stepping softly among the quiet echoes of long-gone monarchs. The stone beneath your feet has grown cool and smooth with the passage of centuries, worn down like the pages of a weathered manuscript you might hold between your fingers. Throughout this gentle journey, you've trailed the flickering light of candle flames that danced against cold walls, chased the murmur of distant voices hidden in the folds of velvet tapestries, and lingered just a moment longer in rooms where the scent of aged wood and faint traces of lavender rose in the air. Now, as the faint glow of twilight dims to a tender shadow, you find yourself standing at the threshold of this ancient realm, the dust mote settling softly, as if the very air exhales a quiet sigh. The ghostly halls you ventured through have grown still, the shadows of kings and queens folding gently into themselves like old letters slipped back into envelopes. Their stories, once vibrant with the weight of crowns and the murmur of courtly intrigue, now rest like a lullaby woven into the tapestry of night. Imagine the chambers you passed, the vast and solemn rooms where marble pillars hold up high, echoing ceilings, the faint chill of stone brushing against your skin, the gentle rustle of silk gowns long since vanished. In these spaces, the past lingers like a delicate fragrance, a trace of sandalwood and cedar, mingled with the faintest trace of smoke from extinguished candles. Even the silence seems to cradle you, soft as a well-worn quilt, inviting your breathing to slow, to deepen, to become the rhythm of calm that bridges the ages. The kings you walked alongside, draped in shadows now, wear their histories lightly, like faded cloaks folded upon ancient settles. Their ambitions, their triumphs, their quiet moments of doubt, all come to rest with the night. Their footsteps, once heavy and commanding, have turned into whispers carried away by the cool night breeze slipping through cracked windows. The weight of their crowns dissolves, becoming as light as the feather drifting down from a ghostly plume. You might feel the lingering presence of their stories, a sense of something vast and unknowable, like the distant murmur of waves against a forgotten shore. Yet, it is not a weight to burden your mind, but a tender invitation to let go, to let the shadows fade with the dimming light. Let your thoughts drift gently now, away from the carved thrones and heavy tapestries, and towards a quiet stillness that waits just beyond. There is a softness here, a hush that wraps itself around you like a silken scarf, gentle and cool, carrying with it the promise of rest. The slow flicker of candlelight, the faint scent of ancient parchment, the subtle rustle of soft fabric, all of these fold together, weaving a cocoon that encourages your eyelids to grow heavy, your breath to smooth into the rhythm of nighttime's embrace. You might imagine the echo of the past slowly blending with the quiet pulse of your own heartbeat, a gentle reminder that you too are part of this vast, unfolding story. So now, as you stand quietly in the fading light, take a deep breath and feel the world soften around you. Let the ghostly halls of kings and queens settle into the background of your mind, their stories now tucked away like trusted old friends saying their soft farewells. The air feels calm and cool, almost like a whispered goodnight spoken by the stones themselves. You lie down in this vast expanse of time and space, where the shadows no longer hold the weight they once did. Instead, they become a gentle veil, a soft curtain closing over the day, inviting you to drift and dream. Just as the kings and queens have finally laid their histories to rest, you too can surrender to the quiet luxury of sleep. Let their shadows fade slowly, like the last trail of smoke from a candle snuffed out in a heavy brass holder. Let this moment be the closing of a book whose pages you have lovingly turned, now waiting patiently on a wooden shelf, safe and still until morning's light. And as your own eyelids flutter closed, may you find yourself wrapped in the peacefulness of this timeless night, carried softly away on the cool breath of history's hush. Good night, dear traveler of ancient halls. The past is at rest, and so are you.